Well, hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the 20 Years of Women on Boards podcast with me, Claire Braund, the co-founder and now CEO of Women on Boards. Today we're talking to Susan Benedyka, a highly experienced regional leader with a strong background in governance, strategic planning and community engagement. Her career has spanned leadership roles in local government, regional development organisations and advisory bodies across rural and regional Victoria. For many years, she lived on a farm outside of Wangaratta, but has recently downsized and is currently the administrator of Moira Shire Council. Welcome, Susan.
Good morning, Claire. Lovely to be talking with you.
Well, we first met many years ago when I was on the board of the Foundation for Australian Agricultural Women, and your passion for making a difference in regional communities was evident then. So can you tell us a little bit about your early years, where you grew up, and what drove this passion?
Well, I'm a rural and regional person through and through. So that's the starting point. I was born in Broken Hill. I grew up in Wagga Wagga, and I've had regional positions in Dubbo and then moved to the northeast Victoria in 2000. So, really strong rural and regional background. And I've always truly believed that we should have a voice. We should have a voice on a national level, a statewide level and a regional level, and one that's not confused with just an agricultural voice. We have so many other aspects of our lives and ourselves to bring, and also the consideration of what happens in rural and regional areas.
And of course, 1997, you established the Regional Development Company, which is still going after stepping down as CEO of the Dubbo City Development Corporation. And this was the beginning of your leadership of well over 1,000 regional and community development projects, a huge track record. Which ones remain in your mind as having had the most impact or probably also being the most rewarding?
Oh, this was such a difficult thing to think about. There was probably over 1,700 projects. So if you think through a project in a consulting term, it could be a 2-year-long gig where you're working on multiple aspects of a long program, or it could be 2 days. You're going to prepare a meeting, go and facilitate a meeting, then write that meeting up. So that's why the variance over time. For me, when I thought about impact, it's really what difference does it make in the long term? And whilst I've worked on significant strategic plans, one project that came to mind was working with Goulburn Murray Water and doing the 50-year vision and long-term plans for each of their water storages across their footprint area. So that was significant because I know now as an administrator at Moira Shire, we're interacting with those plans on a daily basis. We have to know what's going on with those water storages, what the long-term view was, all those sort of things. That project ran over 2 years and it was quite a large project. But again, when I think of impact, I also think of the people who've been changed through the process and what difference they're now making. I'm a graduate of the Australian Rural Leadership Program and then have been really heavily involved with the Alpine Valleys Community Leadership Program for 20 years or more now, 23 years I think. I used to run the opening retreats, the mid-year retreats and the closing retreats, and certainly now I still have sessions involved in those retreats. To watch those people come into a leadership program already connected in their community in some way, but watch them grow and the impact that they've now made in our region is significant. So you think I might have had a little part in that journey. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, the ARLP has got a fantastic track record of leaders, and I think it's just been one of the outstanding sort of almost under the radar quiet success stories, because so many people that you meet who are leading across regional and rural areas now have been a graduate of the ARLP and that lovely alumnus. Well, it must be in the thousands now, Susan, is it?
I'm not quite sure of the ARLP alumnus, but it really is. I was on course 4, and that was 1997, 1998. So it's now well into the 30s of the courses. So it's absolutely significant. And it's 30 or thereabouts rural and regional leaders. And the skill development, the connections, the people you meet, and the notion of working together across Australia, really foundational and fundamental. And some of my early board roles were as a result of having participated in the Australian Rural Leadership Program.
I think the common theme throughout your long and varied career has been, of course, this dedication to helping shape people and shape communities, particularly those in regional areas. And you spoke interestingly about thinking about that beyond agriculture, because, of course, it absolutely is. And it's about making these communities strong, resilient, and resourceful. And they do really, I think, people in rural and regional areas work together very well. And it's almost out of necessity. It's because you have to. There's no one else coming to your aid. You need to be able to do it yourself. So can you describe your unique approach to personal and leadership development and community facilitation and development?
I think I love starting with strengths. So there's work from Dr. David Cooperrider called Appreciative Inquiry, and it actually says in any organisation, in any place, there is something that works, and you find out what works. That goes for individuals as well. There's always something inside each of us and that works, something that we're really good at, something that's strong, something we've learned. Organisations are the same. What is that thing in that group or organisation or group of people or board that actually works, and how can you build from that? So that strengths-based approach has been really significant and important, both in facilitation as well as in growing other leaders. I also like to work with the knowledge in the room. People are not empty vessels to be filled up. We've actually got life experience. We've got so much knowledge, and it's bringing that to bear. So how do we get the best out of people's knowledge and experience and skills that then can form solutions or create crazy ideas, whatever it can do to make a difference in how we might move forward. And I think also it's that enabling role. It's not a doing role in leadership. For me, it's an enabling role. How can I enable the best ideas to come forward, or the best people to come forward, or certainly through my mentoring, how do I enable someone to do what they're really capable of doing?
Thank you. You were early to the boardroom. You mentioned that before, starting on your governance journey in the early 1990s. Do you remember your first board role or roles and how they came about?
This took me so long back in the memory. So I think, like many other rural and regional women, we sat on committees. We did the things like the childcare centre committee or the neighbourhood centre committee. So even though they had employment roles, I don't think we treated them with the same level of respect we treated board roles. But it was still a great start, and I was doing that right through on committees from the 70s onwards, the late 70s. My first real board appointment was actually an advisory board, and it was the Riverina Area Consultative Committee, and it was an appointment by the federal government. And that was the start of area consultative committees around Australia, which later became REDOs, Regional Economic Development Organisations, and then went on to be other forms of organisations, including Regional Development Australia boards. That one was an application. I was actually tapped on the shoulder to say, you're in a role. I was the executive officer for the Riverina Regional Development Board at the time. You're in a role that we think will really contribute here. Would you put an application in? So going through an application process. Then later on, when I was doing the Australian Rural Leadership Program, I became really aware of the impact we could make on national boards, people leading from rural and regional areas, but actually bringing that to a national level. And at the end of my program, I was tapped on the shoulder literally and said, there are 2 significant opportunities. Would you like to apply for them? and one was on the board of the Telstra Foundation, which is a philanthropic arm of Telstra, and the other one is the National Rural Advisory Council, which was RASAC at the time, Regional Adjustment Scheme Advisory Council. And I think there was another one that was associated with that, and that's probably one of the ways in which we met at the start too. And I was on the National Rural Women's Advisory Council when Wendy Craik was the chair. So those ones came about because I was in the slipstream. I was now a known quantity because of the Australian Rural Leadership Program, but then you still have to go through application processes and just good enough to be in that room and then be a contributor in that room. So the pathway to boards is so many different ways, but it's also keeping an eye out, being able to know what's going on and where it's happening, and being intentional about your fit and the contribution you can make.
You spoke about a couple of the boards and advisory councils that you've served on, and of course you also then went on and you were on the Charles Sturt University Council, the La Trobe University Regional Advisory Board, and you were former chair of Regional Development Australia in Hume. So what's one insight about boards or governance that you only truly understood once you were in the boardroom?
The onus of responsibility. That as a director, I am truly responsible. And I think in those early days, it would be OHS, now called Workplace Health and Safety Presentations, when they said, you are the director. You are responsible for your decisions, your actions, the decisions you make and the questions you ask are all part of that responsibility. And I think that was the biggest awareness, really, in sitting around the board table. It was almost a sledgehammer. It was like, oh my goodness, I am really responsible. And I think that then flows through to risk, it flows through to strategy, flows through to the financial decisions that you're making around that board table. It's not just an exercise. This has real world impacts, and you're also responsible for the decisions you make.
So you've mentioned that you were tapped on the shoulder on numerous times, but how else do you find your board roles?
Well, my favourite tool is Women on Boards. It's been an absolute godsend. So in 2022, I resigned from all the boards that I was on. I was having a swing at politics, and I did not want to be a lightning rod for any of those organisations. I wanted a clean slate. And then to be able to get back on boards in 2023, I literally wrote down what were the sort of boards I wanted to be on, what was the sort of contribution I wanted to make, how was I going to continue my portfolio career. And straight away, every week, I get that Women on Boards email that tells me what's available, where it's available, what the process is. I also look on the Victorian Government website. So there is a website that clearly tells you what board positions are available. And I've been a member of the AICD for goodness knows how long, since the 1990s. And I do look at theirs, but the one that's absolutely outstanding is the Women on Boards weekly email. I love it.
Thank you. And it's been going out on a Tuesday at 5:00 for 20 years now, or probably slightly longer. So that is amazing. So thank you for that. Boardrooms have changed a lot in the past 20 to 30 years that you've been serving on boards. And I think the responsibility, particularly around being a director, I don't think it's changed in terms of its legal, well, it has in some instances, but there's certainly been a much greater focus put on the role of directors, I think is how I would put it. So what advice would you give to emerging directors in 2026?
A couple of different pieces of advice. One is do your due diligence before you accept a role or go for a role. That is, how is that organisation functioning? What does its annual reporting look like? What does its balance sheet look like? What are the sort of problems it might be in? That's absolutely okay if you're going into an organisation that needs a lot of work and a lot of fixing, but go in with a clear knowledge and understanding of what's going on in that organisation. So that one really, really comes to mind. I mentor a lot of women, and I always say, have a look at the organisation, know what's going on, what are the hidden bits, what are the things that they're not saying, and really know what you're getting yourself into. It's quite high. The other one is to understand the context in which that organisation operates. We are so impacted by world events, by national events, by climate events, by a whole range of things. What's the context in which that organisation operates, and how can you continually scan for what's changing, what's new, what you need to take into account, what you just need to keep an eye on, and what impacts it has on your organisation.
I mentioned before you've been a Women on Boards member for many years, I think just about pretty much our entire 20 years. And in that time we've discussed your board career has really taken off. You mentioned before the value of the vacancy board, but are there other things that Women on Boards has done that have been important to you in your board journey?
I think social connection's been a really important one. So I first found out about Women on Boards through you, Claire, through you mentioning it, and I signed up pretty well straight away because it was great to know other women board directors. When I first started on boards, it was not unusual to be the only woman in the room, and then you might see 2 women in the room, and by the time you had 3 women in the room, you had a really much better way of being able to work. But back in those lonely days of being the only woman in the room, it was how did you get your voice heard? When your points were repeated by people 2 or 3 times after you, those sort of things still happens. But it was who else has this experience? And to be able to meet with other women around a luncheon table or to meet them at an event and know that they were going through exactly the same things and hearing what they were hearing was really good. I've also enjoyed being able to contribute as a panel member sometimes into discussions, particularly because most of my appointments have been government boards, and that's quite comfortable, the space for me, and working with other women to say this is how you might do it. So the social connections, the information, one of my boards, I must say, is truly because Ruth Med had talked about it so many times, and that's APRA, the Australian Health Professionals Regulation Authority. And to be able to realise that they were such good boards and available, and they're always looking for talented people from a whole range of backgrounds, that was really useful. And that was straight from Ruth Med at one of our many, many sessions.
Thank you. I'll pass that on. Tell me, as the number of women on boards continues to grow across all sectors and WOB enters its next decade, what do you see as the next frontier?
I think the next frontier is looking at women with a whole range of different experiences and backgrounds. Not just women, but people with disability. And it's also not having the same cut of the private school education or the connected with, I know so-and-so and so-and-so knows me. I think we've got to get much, much broader with the sort of people who can have really significant input onto boards. I see it quite a lot. I'm a mentor with one organisation that works with people with disability and helps them find their way onto boards. And it's really wonderful to see they have a shadowing program. Someone does their program, then shadows for a year, then is mentored. And it's a really great way of getting additional life experience and skills onto boards. There are so many organisations. If you think of, for example, a health insurance organisation, if they're not having consumers with a wide range of experience having some input, they're losing a lot of information and knowledge. So it's that push or that barrier of not seeing board members in just one mould. We've got to see board members right across the spectrum of life experience and background.
Susan, you've already mentioned to us that you stood down from all your boards in 2022 and then stood as an independent Senate candidate for Victoria, having been a founding member of Voices for Indi, the grassroots movement that helped launch the political career of independent MP and very well-known agriculture woman Cathy McGowan in 2013. So does this mean politics is still on the agenda for Susan Benedyka? And how important has the Voices for Indi movement, and how important will it become in the future?
Oh, Voices for Indi was such an exceptional journey to be on. We used to meet in secret, literally, in the library committee room, and we're very worried about our ideas, but we wanted a person of our region, for our electorate, who was connected to the electorate, who was the voice of the electorate, but came back and looped back to what mattered to us. It wasn't a political point of view, it was what matters. What's our representation going to be like? How do we have a voice in Parliament about things that matter, regardless of what we've got in our background, whether we've come from a political party point of view or a non-political party point of view? And Cathy McGowan and subsequently Helen Haynes have absolutely exemplified the sort of person that we needed in Parliament. Because of that Voices for Indi experience and working with a number of others, we saw that the next frontier was, how do you get an independent Senate candidate up? This was before David Pocock was elected. In fact, it was around that time of his election. And it was trying to work out, how do you work through the election process? So in a half Senate election, there are really only 6 positions available. And the first 5 are pretty well predetermined because of the way the voting system works and the preferences flow. So really, anyone else is just fighting for that 6th position. One of the other challenges is you need to have a position above the line. So if you think of the tablecloth Senate paper, there are lots of columns. It might be A through to Z at the top. And when you're above the line, you can have 2 or 3 people underneath you, but you're noticeable. If you run normally as an independent, you're in the band of independents, which is one of the columns on the right-hand side. You actually don't even see them. So it was trying to work out, what's the best process? How might this work? How would this interact with on-the-ground independents running in their electorates and not interfere with their campaigns? So it was a real trial run, and it was a trial that we did with me as the guinea pig, and learnt so much from that. I won't do that again, but I continue and have continued to work until my appointment as an administrator with a group of people who are looking to get up a Senate candidate. We've learnt the lessons, and we think there might be a way. The reason that I've now stood back from that is, as a ministerial appointee, as an administrator, again, I just don't need any murkiness. I need to be able to be clean and clear about what I'm doing.
Thank you so much for that, Susan. I think the political movement is really in an interesting state of flux now, and we're just seeing so much more fragmentation. It's really amazing that people have a very thoughtful contribution and very thoughtful conversations. And which is not surprising given your background in leadership development and boards. And finally, what are 3 words that you would use to sum up your journey over the past 20 to 30 years?
I'm going to choose a couple of phrases in here. One is about continuous learning. The second one is persistence with purpose. And the third one is contribution.
Susan Benedyka, thank you for joining us on the 20 Years of Women on Boards podcast.
Thank you so much, Claire.